So first of all, I just would like to say thank you very much to the Linenholm Library and the staff for actually having me, and for you to dedicating your time on Monday midday to come here to spend some time with me and the Polish pilots. My talk is called The Bloody Foreigners, How Polish Airmen Joined the Banter. And in my talk, I'll be focusing mainly on the history of the Polish Air Force in the Second World War in the West. By West, I mean mainly the United Kingdom. And this would be the first part of my presentation, but the second part of my presentation would focus on Northern Ireland itself. To start with, I would like to introduce the project I'm involved in, For Your Freedom and Ours. It's a social enterprise delivering projects around Polish history and Polish heritage, especially connected to Northern Ireland, the island of Ireland, and the United Kingdom. For the past few years, you might notice that there is still a bit of Polish people living in Northern Ireland. We are quite visible. We are quite integrated, but we also had few issues in terms of building relationship with local communities in the past. With raising level of hate crime in some areas of Northern Ireland, we decided we need to do something to actually foster the relationship and maybe explain that we have more in common with Northern Ireland, with Ireland and local people that some people might understand. And we decided that shared history would be the best way to do it. If you explain the past, if you find connections in the past, it's much easier to build a relationship in the current climate. We launched our project in 2016 at Air Show in Portrush. We kind of decided to run an OCN accredited program, which is to actually take part in an extended program, you have to spend at least 5 weeks with us and learn about everything, starting from the beginning of the Second World War, ending on a current situation in Poland and Polish community in Northern Ireland. But today, trust me, I'll be focusing mainly on Polish Airmen in the Second World War. We've been working with various of different groups coming from Catholic and Protestant background across Northern Ireland. Up to date, we've been having, I think, approximately 1,700 people graduated from our program, which is quite a lot, especially when you take the OCN aspect under consideration. We actually try to make sure that our project is interactive. Instead of having lectures of this sort in classroom settings, we try to take people places. There are actually at least 24 locations across Northern Ireland related to history of the Polish Air Force, which I'll be explaining some of them today. And for me, it is very important to make sure that people can visit those locations, people can see them, people can experience them, and in this way learn more about Polish history in Northern Ireland. When I came here in 2004, I discovered Northern Ireland is very narrow-minded when it comes to history. Everything is based on the history of the Troubles or the history of World War I, which is perfectly fine. But I also discovered there is much more to Northern Ireland that not only local people, but I think general public should be aware of. And Polish history and the history of Polish pirates is actually a tiny part of this history. We've been organizing different events to commemorate the Battle of Britain and other very important dates for the Polish history. We've been also taking groups to Poland. On the study visits, here you have a group from the ABC Council visiting one of the concentration camps based in Poland. This is not Oświęcim or Auschwitz. This is Majdanek in Lublin. Lublin is based in southern east of Poland, very close to Ukrainian border. We've been also taking plenty of youth to Poland. Here you have a group of Army cadets visiting Polish Parliament in 2018. Also, cultural events try to merge two cultures together. Katie Carr is a famous Polish-British singer focusing on the Polish history. Her songs are actually explaining the history of Polish people living in the United Kingdom, especially in the Second World War. And in the background, you see one of the flute bands from Belfast, Shankly Road Defenders. They had a gig together, and I have to say it went really well because after 5 minutes they realized they know the same tunes. They were providing the music, she was singing, a perfect combination both heritage and history. We also established several murals. This is on Foxglove Street in Belfast, in East Belfast. Not necessarily relating to the history of Polish Airmen, but to the history of first independent Polish parachute brigade. If you ever watched the movie Bridge to Far, Nick Hackman was playing John Sosabowski, and John Sosabowski, who was involved in Operation Market Garden, was actually presented on this mural. In terms of actually the beginning of the history of the Polish Air Force, we're gonna have to move back to post-World War I Europe. Poland, the history of Poland is very complicated. I don't want to actually focus on the history of Poland before the World War I too much, but you might didn't know that, but Poland disappeared from the map of Europe for 123 years. So technically, between end of 18th century and the end of World War I, there was no country such Poland. We were actually partitioned by end of 18th century by Prussia, Russia, and Austria-Hungary, which are not on this map any longer. After World War I, the political and social landscape of Europe completely changed. Some countries disappeared, some countries reappeared. We're talking about Germany, we're talking about Soviet Union that was replacing Russia based on political havoc in 1970. The Balkans, the France, and also very important, the island of Ireland and Northern Ireland were being created. Coming back to Poland, after World War I, we kind of were fortunate enough to receive not only our independent back, but also the state, the Polish independent state. This is the state. As you can see, the Poland of 1918, especially the borders, looked completely different to what you can see on the map of Europe today. At the end, I will explain why. A fun fact is that the person who was able to write Polish borders, our General Piłsudski, he kind of claimed half of Lithuania as a part of Poland. Very similar story to what we have in Island of Ireland. He decided to claim half of Lithuania, including Vilnius or Vilna, which is capital of Lithuania, only because his family was from there. As you can imagine, Lithuanians were not very happy about this, and they're not very happy about that part of history today. So we're having our own ongoing issue when it comes to borderlands and identity in Central Europe. In terms of actually World War II, in 1939, Germany or Adolf Hitler demanded that Poland would actually grant him a permission to build a motorway between East Prussia and Germany. The motorway would actually means that Germany would actually get a corridor. This connecting Poland from the Baltic Sea. In 1918, actually, one of the in 1918, when we granted actually permission to get our own country back, one of the rules was that we're going to have access to the Baltic Sea. We always were, we are, and we always be a Baltic state country. Also, our economy was very highly based and still based on access to the Baltic Sea. So when Hitler demanded that, we obviously said no, because this would actually cost us access to the Baltic Sea. And we had a very little access to the Baltic Sea, including Danzig or the free city of Gdańsk, or Tri-City as we know it today. So we simply said no. And that was enough for Adolf Hitler in Germany to actually start the invasion of Poland. On the 1st of September 1939, with a formal declaration of war, Nazi Germany started the invasion. What is actually quite interesting, the invasion started by the Luftwaffe, which was the German Air Force. World War II, especially when World War II started, every single army was actually highly focusing on the Air Force because people believed that Air Force would actually be the main force that would actually help you to win the war. And they destroyed city of Wielu, which has no significant meaning to Polish political, culture, or military aspect at all. If you're from Portadown, please forgive me this, but bombing Wielu was actually, had no sort of sense. It was like starting the World War III by bombing Portadown, right? I think the idea behind destroying Bieruń was that Luftwaffe wanted to see how far they can actually get into the Polish territory before before they will be spotted by the Polish defense. Other theory is that Bieruń actually, the population of Bieruń was made of Jewish population. Over 65% of Bieruń was made of Jewish population. I think this theory is kind of a bit too much for me. I think it was mainly based on the aspect that they wanted to see how far they can go into the Polish territory and check our defense mechanisms. So yes, so early morning, 4:42 a.m., 1st of September 1939, the Second World War II officially started. As far as the Polish Air Force is being concerned, these statistics are very important. In the 17 days of World War II, between 1st and 17th of September 1939, Polish Air Force was actually engaged, fighting the Luftwaffe, being very successful. Only in first day of the invasion, they were able to shoot down 45 German aircraft, altogether 225, only in September 1939. This statistic is going to be very important because these statistics are proving that Polish Air Force were actually quite professional and they knew what they were doing. On the 3rd of September 1939, UK and France declared war on Germany. And we were hoping that this would happen. We were hoping that they're going to actually provide support. Mainly, they would open a Western front somewhere between France and Germany to actually slow down the invasion of Poland. And you know what? And this never happened. The only support that we received from either UK and France was mainly from the UK sending leaflets or dropping leaflets on western parts of Germany, asking Germans to stop the invasion and threatening them with military involvement. But this never happened either. So we were kind of left by ourselves. This is the Belfast Telegraph from the 3rd of September 1939, informing people of Northern Ireland about the declaration of war by UK and France. What we didn't know that on the 17th of September 1939, the Russians were going to join the invasion. This was actually pre-planned during the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact that was being signed in August 1939 between Russia and Germany, or between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Based on the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, they kind of agreed that they would divide Europe in half, and Poland was actually in the middle of it. At first, we thought that Russian or Soviet army is actually coming to support us, but it was obviously clear that they're coming to support Germany when they opened fire to the Polish soldiers. And this situation was very complicated for us because by 17th of September, we were attacked. We were actually trying to defend Poland from the west, approximately 500,000 German soldiers, 1,500,000 German soldiers, and 500,000 Soviet soldiers approached us from the east. At that time, the Polish army was 1 million strong. So we were kind of outnumbered, 2 to 1. And by end of October 1939, Poland was partitioned by Russians and Germans. This is a very popular sketch, especially in September 1939. Adolf Hitler greeting Joseph Stalin over a dead body that was representing Poland. By October 1939, there was no country such Poland on the map of Europe. This is how Poland was being partitioned. Half of Poland went to Third Reich, which was Germany. The other half went to Soviet Russia. We also lost a tiny bit to Slovakia, which also came to support the invasion with 50,000 soldiers. And when Poland was actually partitioned in October 1939, the Polish government and the Polish army had two choices: to stay in Poland, ended up in captivity, and that would be possibly over for the Polish government and the Polish army, and the most important, for the Polish independence. They decided that they will regroup in France as quick as possible. So the Polish government selected new government that was immediately installed in Paris, and we started calling them the Polish government in exile. And they also sent an order to Polish army from 1 million, approximately 200 soldiers were still fully operational in October 1939. 600 of them, from the million that the Polish army had, ended up in Russian concentration camps. You might hear about gulags. The camps that were based very deep in Siberia, where the temperatures during winter were dropping to -50. But this is a completely different story. And if you would like to actually learn more about the Poles in gulags, there's plenty of books and plenty of documentaries available on YouTube. Coming back to the Polish pilots, the Polish army was actually escaping from Poland on different routes. Some people decided to go directly through Germany, which was very risky, and possibly majority of them ended up in captivity. Others decided to use the north route, which was also very dangerous, and some decided to go to the south. This is actually the route that one of the Polish pilots took. He actually decided to leave Poland on the 17th of September 1939. That was the day when the Russian came to Poland. He left with 10 air cadets, and they actually did majority of this route on foot. Why on foot? Because it was easier to hide, and they were actually escaping from Poland in smaller groups, up to 10 soldiers or cadets, whatever. Because with smaller groups, it was easier to hide, easier to get food, and also keep the morals high. If you would have a larger army, all these components could fall down, and it would be very difficult to kind of motivate people to keep going. It took him several months. He actually went from Poland to Bulgaria, to Turkey, from Turkey to Malta, from Malta to Marseille, and from Marseille to Paris. When he arrived in Paris, the second thing happened. France decided to surrender to Germany. Actually, there were several number of Polish pilots or Polish Airmen who were able to reestablish themselves in France. They took part in the Battle of France on the 10th of May against German Luftwaffe, which was another actually act of Polish pilots being involved in the Second World War from the start. They destroyed 86 German aircraft during that campaign. But by June 1940, France decided they don't want to get involved in the Second World War, and they kind of surrendered to Germany, which caused another issue for the Polish government that was already reestablished in Paris, and approximately 50,000 Polish soldiers and Polish pilots who at that stage were already in France. Another question, should they stay or should they go? Obviously, they decided to go because they really wanted to still maintain the independence of the Polish army as well as the Polish government. The only place where the Polish government and the Polish army could go at this time was the United Kingdom. United Kingdom in June 1940 was possibly the only place in Europe free of Germans and Soviets without having any connotations or any military agreements with those two armies. So on the 21st of June 1940, Polish government in exile, led by President Rackiewicz, this guy in the middle, was welcomed by King George VI at the Paddington Station in London. This is the official day of the Polish government in exile arriving in London, and this is also the official day of the Polish army arriving in London. The Polish government in exile stayed in London between June 1940 and 1990. They were fully operational between that period. Do you know why?
After World War II, the Soviet Union took over its new Poland that recognized democratic regime.
Correct. The government that was actually established in Poland after World War II was the communist-led government. This government was established in free and democratic Poland post-World War I, and they decided to keep going until the Poland is free and independent again. Only in 1990, when the first partially free election in Poland took place after communism collapsing, the government decided that they're gonna pass all the powers to the Polish government in Poland. Obviously, as a government, they didn't have much powers, but they were kind of lobbying internationally on behalf of free and democratic Poland and against communism in the western part of Europe. By June 1940, approximately 8,000 members of the Polish Air Force arrived in Britain. We're talking about pilots, ground crew, and administrative staff. And they all came under the old traditional Polish motto, for your freedom and ours. And that's why we decided to call our project in Polish. If you ever need to speak Polish, it would sound like for your za wolność naszą I waszą. Polish language is very difficult, so I'm not blaming you not being able to pronounce it. Also, another very important aspect, you see the Polish I forgot the word. Sorry? Standard. Thank you. Yeah. Miłość rządzi ofiary means love demands sacrifice, and that was actually the slogan under which Polish pilots were fighting. They kind of were prepared to sacrifice everything for the independence of Poland. At the same time, around 10th of July 1940, the Battle of Britain had started. This was arguably one of the most important battles for the United Kingdom and possibly for the whole of Europe in the Second World War. After being so successful in mainland Europe, Hitler decided that they would actually also use blitzkrieg when it comes to the United Kingdom. He decided to send his Luftwaffe to destroy the defense mechanisms, mainly on the south coast of England and hopefully London. And when this is done, Hitler was actually prepared to send barges from Belgium and France and start the land invasion. If this would be successful, I think we all would be speaking German at this stage. Possible. This is kind of like, arguably the way how the history would end up. But it never happened. The land invasion never started. And you can actually find photographs of barges being fully loaded and waiting for the right moment to approach the United Kingdom. Instead, the Battle of Britain became one of the biggest aerial fights of the Second World War, where Luftwaffe and RAF, supported by many other nationalities, proved that actually Air Force is very important when it comes to fighting in the Second World War. At this stage, we had the Polish government in England, we had the Polish army, but we didn't have anything else. We didn't have place to stay, we didn't have equipment. So on the 5th of August 1940, Poland and Great Britain signed a military agreement that allowed Polish government to create an independent Polish armed force, including Polish Air Force. Why I'm actually emphasizing on word independent? Because this was the first time in the history of the United Kingdom when a foreign army granted a permission to be fully operational from this part of Europe and be independent. Also, this was the first time, this was the time when Poland became the first and the only ally of the United Kingdom in 1940. We were the first and the last standing ally of the United Kingdom in the Second World War. And this is all great because now we have now we have an independent armed force, now we have equipment, now we have soldiers, and we can go and fight, right? Not necessarily. Polish pilots came to the United Kingdom willing to fight. They were fighting Germans in Poland, they were fighting Germans in France. So they hoped they would actually start fighting Germans immediately. Unfortunately, there was plenty of reasons that RAF decided that they would put them on bench first. First of all, the language. Before the Second World War, English wasn't the most popular language, foreign language. The French was. So majority of Polish pilots they were bilingual, they could speak French and Polish. Only two or three could communicate in English. So obviously they were an independent Polish Air Force, but using British equipment, using British system, and the communication was actually being run in English. So in order to be able to fight, they had to speak at least basic English and understand comments. They didn't know how to use British equipment, so they had to learn that. Also, the other thing was that RAF kind of followed this German propaganda that said that because Polish Air Force survived only a month against Luftwaffe in Poland in 1939, they were useless. And based on the statistics, we knew that these guys were actually, they delivered a few quite reasonable successes during the September campaign. So when the Battle of Britain was started, Polish pilots had to spend hours on training how to use the equipment, how to fly airplanes, how to speak English. Some of them were also chasing girls, as you do. After a few hours of actually heavy training, they were actually drinking in local pubs, chasing local girls. Some were even getting married. If you ask me, a perfect way to spend the war. You kind of go to work, you spend 8 hours of learning how to become a pilot, and then you go to the pub and you chase girls, and you getting up the next. Yeah, as well. It was actually very useful, especially when you decided to chase local girls, right? And next day you just get up and you repeat the same. Perfect. But not for the Poles. You have to remember that these guys were not war refugees. They were professional pilots who wanted to fight the Germans. And majority of them had personal reasons. The World War II started in 1939 in Poland. UK joined the World War II only in 1940 when the Battle of Britain started. So the Polish pilots, they not only had to escape half of the Europe to come to the United Kingdom, not only they knew that Poland is actually, gone from the map of Europe, but they were also receiving messages from Poland saying that their friends, families are being executed or ended up in concentration camps run by the Germans. So they had personal reasons to actually fight the Germans. By end of August, there were 3 Polish squadrons fully operational. 2 bomber squadrons, 300 and 301, and they were sent immediately to fight over Germany. For some reason, they are not included as a part of the Battle of Britain squadrons. But 2 other Polish fighter squadrons was 302 and 303. 302 ended up serving in Newcastle, and 303 ended up serving in RAF Norfolk, northwest of London, approximately. And they were kind of, when they were especially in Norfolk, they could see that the less and less RAF pilots were coming back from the fight, because by end of August 1940, RAF was losing the Battle of Britain. You have to remember that RAF was fighting against a battle-hardened German pilots who were actually taking part in the battle in the World War II from September 1939. And Polish pilots could actually see, could smell, could hear the Battle of Britain happening over London. And they were kind of like, eager to go and fight. Very angry, very emotional, but they couldn't, because their order was, you don't engage. Only until 30th August 1940, one of the pilots from the 303 Squadron, Paszkiewicz, another very difficult name to remember, so I'm not gonna torture you with that, disobeyed order when spotting a Messerschmitt while on a training flight. And he shot it down. He came back to the base. He was officially reprimanded, unofficially congratulated by the RAF. And that was enough for the RAF to kind of decide that we might actually use the Polish squadron and see how they perform. The next day, on the 31st of August 1940, the 303 Squadron that was based in RAF Norfolk was airborne, taking part in the Battle of Britain for the first time, coming back with 6 confirmed victories against Germany without losing none of its pilots. That was enough for the RAF to send them more often. And they actually, from the 31st of August, the Polish Air Force is officially joining the Battle of Britain. A total of 145 Polish Airmen took part in the Battle of Britain. 79 were actually fighting with various RAF squadrons, 32 with 303 Squadron, and 34 with 303 Polish Fighter Squadron. There was the Polish Air Force accounted for over 203, or approximately 7.5, all enemy aircraft credited as destroyed during the Battle of Britain. 29 Polish pilots lost their lives. The most important day for the Battle of Britain, 15th of September 1940. This was actually the turning point for the battle. From that very moment, RAF started winning the Battle of Britain, thanks to support from the Polish pilots. 2 of the squadrons were airborne that day, 302 with 17 victories, and 303 with 17 victories, and 302 16 victories. 302 was being sent from Newcastle to Norfolk only for 2 weeks to take part in the Battle of Britain, because this was the most important day, and RAF knew that they're gonna have to engage everything they have to actually turn the victory into their side. Also, most of the Polish fighters were actually fighting on Hurricanes. Majority of people believe that Spitfire was the aircraft that won the Battle of Britain. Actually, no, it was the Hurricane. The Spitfire proved that it's actually much better fighter plane than the Hurricane during the Battle of Britain, but majority of pilots who took part in the Battle of Britain were actually flying the Hurricanes, including the Polish pilots. The first Polish squadron who took part in the Battle of Britain, 302, they actually claimed 21 enemy aircraft destroyed. 11 probably destroyed and 2 damaged between only 2 weeks in September, between 14th of September and 25th of September 1940. So these statistics are proving you that if they would be based in Norfolk, maybe from end of August, they could actually provide more enemy aircraft as destroyed. But I also would like to introduce you to the most successful squadron of the Battle of Britain, from all the squadron taking place, the 303 Squadron. I usually refer to them as the most famous boys band of 1940, or the Beatles before the Beatles were even born. They were so successful that they actually only between end of August or like September and October 1940, they were able to shut down 126 confirmed victories, which was the highest percentage of all the squadrons taking part in the Battle of Britain. Remember when I told you that RAF was losing the Battle of Britain? When Poles becoming very successful, they decided to use them as a PR story. So from September 1940, you could hear or read about the Polish successful squadron, 303 Squadron, in all the newspapers across England. You know, the slogans were successful Poles, Poles done it again, Poles winning the Battle of Britain, right? They were so successful, so popular, that some of the RAF pilots were actually mocking Polish accent while talking to local girls. Some of them were actually putting Polish emblems on their uniforms because they had more chances with local girls than without the emblem. These guys become really popular that every single girl wanted to go out with the famous 303 Squadron pilot. That was actually, that's why I refer to them as the most successful boys band of 1940. They were so popular that on the 26th of September, King George VI decided to come and greet them. And when he left Norfolk, they actually were airborne and destroyed another 13 German aircraft just to kind of mark this special occasion. The most successful non-British ace, Alien ace of the Battle of Britain was Joseph Franciszek from Czech. He was a Czech flying with 303 Squadron. His mom was Polish. He actually confirmed 17 victories and 1 probable, and he gained that only in 4 weeks in September 1940. Unfortunately, he lost his life later on in September that year. Had it not been for the magnificent material contributed by the Polish squadrons and their unsurprised gallantry, I hesitate to say that the outcome of the battle would have been the same. Only after the Battle of Britain finished, RAF kind of confirmed that they made a mistake and they could allow Poles to fly and fight in the Battle of Britain from day one. Another very famous quotation, never in the field of human conflict was so much owned by so many to so few, by Winston Churchill. I don't have to introduce you to this quote, and I don't want to steal this quote to say that Winston Churchill mentioned that about the Poles. He mentioned that about every single pilot fighting in the Battle of Britain. And this might be very kind of surprising for you, but the Battle of Britain was fought, but not only the Poles and the Brits. There were so many different pilots, different nationalities flying and fighting in the Battle of Britain. Obviously, the Polish squadron, the Polish contingent was the largest non-British contingent, but we had Czechoslovakia, Australia, New Zealand, South Rhodesia, South Africa, Belgium, France, Barbados, Jamaica, US, Canada, and Ireland. Not to mention several thousand of mechanics, ground crew, and administrative staff that they had to make sure that these pilots are ready to be airborne every single day and go and defend the independence of the United Kingdom, right? Also, a fun fact about Battle of Britain. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Józef Kosacki invented a mine detector, the detector as we know it today. Why I'm actually referring to this? Because he came with Polish Army to the United Kingdom in 1941. he didn't have like Polish Army didn't have money to actually kind of build a prototype of his invention. So he sold his patent to the British Army. They immediately developed the mine detector as we know it today. There are like minor changes to the mine detector as we know it today. And they used this invention to clear British beaches from over 350,000 mines that were being dropped by the Germans during the Battle of Britain. It's kind of a fun fact, maybe a useless knowledge or maybe interesting to some, I don't know, especially if you're actually hunting for treasures with your mine detector, that might be quite useful. As far as Northern Ireland is being concerned, yes, there were Polish pilots based in Northern Ireland, and there are several locations on the map of Northern Ireland that I related to the history of Polish pilots. Actually, this was 20. This one is 25, but since we created this map, we were able to find a few more. Majority of Polish history is located to Belfast and County Down, but there was also a few things happening on the north coast. The first group of Polish pilots arrived to Northern Ireland to join the number 245 Squadron at RAF Aldergrove on the 9th of November 1940. To be exact, 10 of them. Some of them are actually on this image of number 245, and they were flying Hurricanes. The first operational flight by the Polish personnel from 245 Squadron took place on the 17th of November 1940. And this image is actually an image of 245 Squadron based at Aldergrove. I believe this image was being taken in the summer 1941, because you can see that some of the ground crew staff is wearing actually a short sleeve uniforms. The first casualty of the first Polish casualty that lost his life in Northern Ireland. Shortly after he arrived, Sergeant Franciszek Prędkiewicz, another difficult surname to pronounce, was on an operation flight on the 30th of November 1940 from Aldergrove over the Glens of Antrim. And while coming back to the base, his engine seized in the air. He was actually flying a Hurricane. Prędkiewicz tried to jump of a diving aircraft. Unfortunately, his parachute got caught around the tail of his Hurricane and brought him down. He died upon a crash in very high in the Glens of Antrim, and his grave can be found at Glenaby Roman Catholic Cemetery, which is not far away from what we know today, the International Airport. What is actually quite interesting, this is not him. This is not Sergeant Prędkiewicz. For many years, we thought we had actually an actual image of the Polish pilot. Only last year, I discovered this was actually a Russian soldier. And for some reason, the image was being used as image of Prędkiewicz. I decided to keep it to show you that actually history can be rather interesting and very often misleading. Because one day you think you have something solid, and the other day you're discovering this was completely, this was not, it's not related, and you have to start everything from the scratch. Until today, I wasn't able to find his image. In 1984, the Austrian Aviation Society decided to dig up the engine of his Hurricane that was actually being left in the ground after the accident. And because the accident took place very high in Antrim Glens, there was no way that RAF in the Second World War could actually bring the engine nor the remaining of the Hurricane down. So in 1944, Austrian Aviation Society had to use or ask for help. Number 655 Squadron that was based in Aldergrove, and that was the only way how they could actually dig up the engine from the field high in the Antrim Glens. This is the image of the hole that was being left. This is Ernie Cromie, who was actually a chairman of the Austrian Aviation Society for many years. Some of you might know him. Unfortunately, Ernie passed away last year. A good friend of mine, and he was actually the driving force behind me being involved in researching the Polish Air Force based in Northern Ireland. And I decided to visit this location, or I believed I was pretty close. It took me 3 hours to actually find the coordinates. It was during the pandemic. I know we had to stay inside. We supposed to not to leave our homes, but I'm the person who is getting really anxious when staying in one place for 2 weeks, for 2 days. So I decided to actually take back routes. I wasn't actually, talking to anyone. I was kind of trying to avoid everyone on my way. And I decided to stick a Polish flag there, kind of to mark the site. I'm pretty sure this wasn't the site, because if you were ever hiking the glens, you know that the landscape is changing after every bigger rain. I couldn't find the hole in the ground. I kind of was, I was actually directed by the coordinates. Not sure if that was the location. The one thing I know for sure, I won't be doing this again. I almost actually twist my ankles 3 times. The terrain is not suitable for hiking. That's what I know for sure. But the engine is available for you to actually go and see it at the Austro Aviation Society today. They brought it to the hangar. They gave it a clean, and only when they actually remove all the mud, they discover what happened with the engine. The oil leaked, causing the engine to size in the air. So the pump sized and the engine sized, and that's why the Polish pilot lost his life. If you will be going to the Aviation Society, you can also visit what we know a Polish room, a room dedicated to the Polish history. So this room would actually tell you almost everything you need to know about the Polish, the involvement of the Polish Air Force in World War II, especially from the UK/Northern Irish perspective. This room was being created in 1940 by our project, like a few weeks ago, we were able to put a new carpet tiles, so this room is looking really nice at the moment, and I would encourage you to go and see it. Another actually aspect of Polish pilots being based in Northern Ireland of Ireland was that some of them ended up what we know today, the Republic. When they were actually on the flight over, over the Irish Sea, because of the equipment failure or maybe lack of fuel, they had to find a place to land, and some of them landed in Ireland. I know I should refer to Irie, but I would actually call it Ireland. Not only them, but also British pilots, German pilots, and later on American pilots were ending up in Ireland in the same way. So the Lavera decided to open a concentration camp, a prisoner of war camp, sorry, which was the most bizarre prisoner of war camp, K-line in Kara. Why it was the most bizarre camp? Because it was open. So you were technically a prisoner of war, but if you actually gave a parole that you won't escape, you could go and have a pint in a local pub. There are images of, for example, German soldiers drinking in local pubs. One of the Polish pilots decided to leave the camp for 3 days. He went for a down there around the island, and he was back in 3 days, and no one said anything. The problem with this camp was that this camp wasn't divided into sections for the Polish prisoner of wars, German prisoner of wars, British and American prisoner of wars. And as you can imagine, putting Polish pilots and German pilots in one group without any division was very problematic, because for Poles, that was the way to get a revenge on the Germans. Fights were actually breaking up every single night until Irish decided, okay, we're going to separate these guys because they're causing us plenty of issues. Another, possibly my personal best story when it comes to Polish Air Force over Ireland took place in July 1941. I call it Radomski's mythical flight. Sergeant Radomski was based in Carew-Cherton, and actually in July 1941, he was airborne to chase a German aircraft over the Irish Sea. The weather conditions were very bad. He got lost. His fuel was running low, and he kind of thought he won't be able to make it. And suddenly he spotted an airfield in the air. On the ground. So he thought this would be his only chance to survive. He decided to dive in. When he was getting closer and closer, he actually noted that the strip of at the airfield is being blocked, that he won't be able to land properly. And when he was pretty low, the airfield opened a fire. right? So he decided to turn around because he thought maybe he ended up over occupied France. But after a few seconds, he turned around and he decided to start shooting at the airfield, right? He never landed. He came back to his base in England, and it turns out he was shooting at Dublin International Airport. Well, there is actually a hint in the title of this slide, the mythical flight, because I tried to find any record of this incident, and there is none, right? Only record that I was able to find was his in memoirs, and until his death, he was claiming this is a legit story, but unfortunately, none was confirmed. So it's based, I think maybe that was his claim to fame, or maybe it happened, but RAF decided to keep it low profile because if this would be true, it meant that RAF started shooting at island that was kind of neutral in the Second World War, right? If this is true, this would be possibly the only time when Dublin International Airport was under fire in the Second World War. That's why I love it so much, and that's why I like history, because some of the stories can be confirmed, but they're so interesting that you don't want to drop them.
Can I ask, it's clearly
That, yeah. Another two casualties. Two of them ended up their lives at Sydenham, RAF Sydenham, which is the city airport in Belfast, 23rd of April 1942 and 30th of April 1942. Very close. They both actually had accidents. One actually crashed over a balloon, and the second one kind of because of the equipment failure. Both of them. Both graves are actually located at Milton Cemetery in West Belfast. 9th of July 1942, another Polish pilot lost his life, Henryk Kometa, which was actually not a long time ago. He crashed in Ballykerry near Carrickfergus. He wasn't serving with Polish Squadron, he was serving in 1480 flight based in Newtonards. Also, it might be surprising that I decided to add Spitfire Paddy to my presentation. He was actually one of the 10 Irish pilots as a part of the RAF, a very successful one. He was just 21 years old when he was made a wing commander. But by the time he was killed on the 15th of July 1942, he had 26 confirmed kills. Which means that if he would survive the Second World War, he would become one of the most successful, or maybe the most successful pilot serving in the RAF in the Second World War. Why I'm actually mentioning about him? Because he was training with the Poles, especially with Polish pilots from the 303 Squadron, and he said that Poles actually taught him how to be more creative in the air when fighting Germans. Poles were actually, when they were engaged in fight, they were fighting individually. So they could fight 1-on-1, 2-on-1, 3-on-1, 5-on-1. RAF was fighting actually in formation. No matter what, you had to stick into formation and fight as. Yeah. But unfortunately, when you were kind of using your wingmen, it was too late for you to do anything. And Poles were spreading and they were kind of trying to sort everything independently. And that's what he learned from the Poles. 23rd of August 1942, another incident involving Polish pilot over Island of Ireland. On that day, Luftwaffe set for Belfast once again. Junkers was actually approaching Belfast on a photographic reconnaissance mission, and they were actually approached by the RAF fighter over the Irish Sea. One of the fighters was actually a Polish 315 squadron pilot, flying officer Bolesław Józef Sabia. He was actually chasing them until they ended up over the island of Ireland. He was able to shoot the enemy aircraft down, but unfortunately he lost his life in this incident. He was shot. His knee was being grazed, and actually he got more injuries, sustained further injuries while upon landing. He actually lost his life during his way to hospital in Dublin. This incident took place on Sunday, 23rd of August 1942, in Roth County, Meath. when he was actually engaging in battle against the Germans. There was a mass happening in the local church, and people said that they could hear actually, when you shoot, you have the stuff that is actually, you release the bullet and you have left with, yes. So the part of it was actually banging of the roof of the church while the mass was taking place. This is Saviak and his 315 Spitfire. In 2017, a local council decided to unveil a memorial dedicated to this history and Josef Saviak. What is quite interesting, the German airplane that crashed with 3 German airmen on board. 3 of them survived. They ended up in the prisoner of war camp later on. But we're talking about 1942, and what was quite surprising, 3 of the German airmen were actually of the Jewish descent. Why we know that? Because they had actually a small Jewish prayers book and some kind of medals, medallions that would actually prove that they're coming of a Jewish faith, which is quite interesting because the Holocaust was already in full swing in 1942. The German concentration camps were fully operational, but you still have 3 Jewish pilots fighting for the Germans. The question is, were they hiding their identity, or because Germany needed manpower, they actually allowed Jewish airmen to be part of the Luftwaffe? We don't know. If you're from Northern Ireland, you might recognize this part. It's an airfield for sure. Yeah, I can actually give you a hint. Nope, but pretty close. Ballyhalbert. Ballyhalbert became a home for 2 Polish squadrons between 1942 and 1944. Because County Down was actually home to Polish squadrons, in 2018 we unveiled a memorial in Newton Arts Cenotaph dedicated to Polish pilots fighting in the Battle of Britain, as well as 2 Polish squadrons based in Northern Ireland. And this memorial was actually being unveiled by 2 ladies who were daughters of 2 Polish airmen who stayed in Northern Ireland after World War II. I will refer to them in a second. Sorry, it was between 1943 and 1944, my bad. The first Polish squadron that arrived to Northern Ireland was 315, and they came to RAF Ballyhalbert on the 6th of July, 1943, from England. And this is an image of them actually coming by sea to Northern Ireland. This is an image of RAF Ballyhalbert from the time when 315 was being based there. You can see 2 Spitfires from 315, and if you could actually zoom in into the barrack, you could actually read what it says on the door. I think I can actually share that with you, and pardon my English. Not many pilots love to be based in Ballyhalbert, to be honest. If you're from Ballyhalbert or if you have a caravan there, don't blame me for that. There was nothing in Ballyhalbert. There was only one pub that was half decent. The closest decent pub was based in Bangor, and kind of the only reason why Ballyhalbert was so popular was because there was Ballyhalbert is quite a windy place, and the airfield was experiencing a side wind. So the conditions in Ballyhalbert were very similar to conditions of landing on the open sea on the aircraft. And this airfield was actually being used to try and train this maneuver. Instead of RAF Ballyhalbert, the slogan said, fucking Ballyhalbert. As I said, apologies my English, literally, this wasn't the most favorite place for any of the squadrons that were located there. I don't know if the Poles did that, or maybe the squadrons before, there were Dutch squadrons, RAF squadrons, American squadrons, so we never, I don't know that. On the 14th of August 1943, a commander-in-chief of the Polish Armed Forces, Kazimierz Sosnkowski, visited RAF Ballyhalbert and visited the 315 squadron. Because of his visit, we actually have plenty of images from that day. He presented some of the most successful pilots with the highest Polish medal, Virtuti Militari, which is the equivalent of the Victory Cross. This is the image of 315 in a flying formation, escorting him while arriving to Bali Halberd over the Irish Sea. These are the Polish officers taking a rest at the officers' mess in area of Bali Halberd. And you can see the map of Northern Ireland with Bali Halberd being marked. And this is 315 in flying formation during the event itself. This is one of my favorite images of the Polish Air Force being based in Northern Ireland. You see there was plenty of guests, including local government, Polish representatives. So this was a very special day for the Polish Air Force. The first casualty from 315 lost his life on the 15th of August 1943. Pilot officer Tuchanski fatally crashed in Rasharkin because of the equipment failure. The most tragic day for the Polish Air Force, especially the 315, took place on the 11th of September 1943. On that day, 3 Polish pilots from 315 were airborne, flying towards Antrim coast on a training flight. On the way back, 3 of them crashed independently in 3 different locations of Northern Ireland. So we have Warrant Officer Grondowski, which crashed near Plantation House in Lisburn. You have Sergeant Kołek, which crashed in Malas. And you have Zygmunt, who crashed in Newton Abbey. These 2 locations are marked and well known, and only recently I was able to find Zygmunt crash. Actually, a few days ago, I received an email from a guy who was pretty sure he found the crash site. I need to go there because in a few months' time, they actually will be, I think there'll be a new development, housing development happening on that crash site. So I want to go and take some images of that crash site before it's going to be gone. Maybe coming back to why they actually crashed, because this is very unusual history. We have 3 in the air, 3 crashing independently in different parts of Northern Ireland. For many years, we thought it was because of the bad weather conditions, right? But I personally believe they trying different maneuvers in the air, and I think they had to collide, and that's what caused them crashing in different parts of the same area, to be honest. Warrant Officer Grondowski was training pilots before the Second World War in Dęblin, the Polish Air Force Academy, and he was known for being the guy who was actually pushing his pilots to the limits. And my kind of prediction is that he was trying to do the same with these guys. They collided, they crashed, and unfortunately 2 of them lost their lives. Zygmunt was able to escape with injuries. He spent 3 months in the hospital, and when he was being questioned about the accident, he only gave a statement due to the bad weather, which is kind of enigmatic, to be honest. Unfortunately, Zygmunt lost his life in 1944. He was shot down by a friendly fire over France, so his fate kind of got into him as well. This was the crash site marked, Grondowski crash site marked in Lisburn. 40 years ago, a local person decided to place a cross to mark the site, but the cross was actually kind of getting really old and really unsuitable for the location. So in 2019, we decided to replace it with a more modern crash site memorial. When we were actually having this event, a lady in her 90s approached us saying that she was actually a crash witness while she was a child. And for her, it was very strange to be in the same location 90 plus years later talking about this accident. She said this was actually one of the most traumatic events in her life, so she remembered everything quite well. Reminding you, she was in her 90s. And she said to us that she's pretty sure that RAF left the Spitfire engine in the ground. So when you said a Spitfire engine from the Polish Air Force being still in the ground, you didn't have to ask us twice. We decided to get a permission. We decided to run an excavation project. We brought Queen's University with plenty of equipment, radars, drones. We were actually using metal detectors. We spent all day, and you know what? We didn't find anything. We found plenty of the metal debris. That was simply rubbish. And the only person who was quite lucky and quite happy at that day was the landowner, because we cleaned his field from all the rubbish. A few months ago, there is a development to this. A few months ago, another eyewitness appeared out of nowhere, claiming that we were searching the wrong field, and actually we should search the field that was next to it. So, so we tried to get the permission, and I think when the weather is nice and we have actually plenty of time, we will try to do it again. My take is we won't find anything, and after maybe a few months, there will be another eyewitness asking us to go and clean his land from metal debris. But it was a really good day, I have to say. I felt like a treasure hunter. Like when the metal detector beeped, we all were kind of excited because we kind of were pretty sure that the engine is in the ground. But yeah, we didn't find anything. We also marked the Malas crash site last year, end of May, to the Sergeant Kołek. And this actually memorial is also based at the location. Unfortunately, his family couldn't visit us. They found us through our Facebook profile, but they were very pleased to hear that we decided to commemorate Kołek and his crash site. They also sent a letter that we were able to read out to the people, and it was a very emotional day because the letter was very personal. Another one, another crash, 5th of October 1943, Flieger fatally crashed in Ballyhalbert while landing. This was possibly the most, another very tragic moment for the Polish Air Force because civilians were being involved. 18th of October 1943, Wing Commander Heller, who was actually he's the highest rank of the Polish Airmen who is buried in Northern Ireland. A World War I veteran, was actually on a training flight over Northern Ireland while based in the Isle of Man. Due to the bad weather condition, he crashed into a house in Glenshek, which is south of Ballycastle, killing Wing Commander, another member of his crew, as well as 20-year-old civilian girl who was actually outside of the house with her boyfriend. I was able to meet up with the family. I was able to speak to the family member. It turns out that the family member I was actually in contact with was in the house as a toddler. She was 3 months old. If the accident would be, if the house would be affected in a more stronger way, she would possibly be the victim as well. On the 9th of November 1943, the 303 Squadron, the most famous squadron, arrived to Northern Ireland, replacing the 315 Squadron. And this is the image of the 303 in Ballyhalbert. As you can see, some things never changed. It was windy then, it's windy now. And it was actually a downgrade to the 303 Squadron. You have to remember that they were actually the pilots in England. And even in 1943, every single newspaper, or 44, every single newspaper, when they wanted to do an article on RAF of Polish Air Force, they wanted to talk to someone from the 303 Squadron. And I think the Polish Air Force and RAF had enough, so they sent them to Northern Ireland, to Ballyhalbert. So the rest of England can kind of forget about them. In England, there were superstars. In Northern Ireland, there were another squadron that was based in Banter. And they also kind of didn't like this. We also have several graves located in Belfast, 6 of them, to be honest. And all of them are related to this tragic incident from the 20th of December 1943, when Wellington from 304 Squadron, that was based in Cornwall, was coming back from the mission, the U-boat patrol over the Bay of Biscay. In very bad weather conditions, they got lost and they fatally crashed on the slopes of Mount Bradley in Kerry. All 6 airmen were killed in that accident. All the bodies were being actually carried by, recovered and carried by the Irish officials to the border with Northern Ireland, and they were being passed to the RAF. That's how 5 of the Polish airmen from that crash ended up at Milton, and 1 ended up at Jewish cemetery in Carmody because he was of the Jewish descent. This is the 30th of April 1944, the time when the 303 Squadron moved to England, and they received, sorry my pronunciation, a gift, which is shilele. Is that the right? Shilele, thank you very much. The Irish shilele to 303 Squadron from Officers' Mess at RAF Ballyhalbert, 1944. May we all meet again. This is actually on display at Sikorsky Museum in London. We tried to actually bring this to Northern Ireland, but Sikorsky Museum, which is a museum created to commemorate the history of the Polish armed forces in the Second World War, is very difficult to deal with because they kind of see those elements as a very precious memorabilia of that time. Maybe it would be doable. If not, if you want to see it, you're going to have to go to London, to Sikorsky Institute and Polish Museum. By the way, it's a very nice place. I would recommend to do so. 4 of the Polish pilots who were based in Northern Ireland were also battle-written veterans, 2 from the 303 and 2 from the 315 Squadron. Also during the pandemic, I decided to visit RAF Ballyhalbert to take some drone shots. That was the best time because there was no one there and it was very quiet. But we also decided to bring the Polish Air Force flag. And this was 2 years ago, and this was possibly the first time since 1944 when the Polish Air Force flag visited RAF Ballyhalbert. It was a very special moment, to be honest. I also already mentioned about the memorial that we unveiled in 2018 to commemorate the 100 years of Polish independence, 100 years of Polish Air Force, and the centenary of the RAF by 2 ladies linked to the Polish Airmen. The history of Polish Airmen in Northern Ireland, or the shared history between Poland and Northern Ireland here, it's actually very rich. If I would have to explain everything, we would have to be here for another 2 or 3 hours. I don't think you want to stay here that long. I'm actually going to be finishing very soon. But one of the examples, Belfast-born Sergeant William Billy Francis Cohen lost his life on board of a Liberator on the 16th of October 1944 when he was actually shot down by a Luftwaffe near Tarnów in south of Poland. His grave can be found in Krakow at the Commonwealth Cemetery. There are actually a few more people from the island of Ireland who lost life over or in Poland during the Second World War. We also have few civilian graves. This one, Paweł Wojciechowicz or Paul Henderson, who was based in Northern Ireland with 305 Squadron, decided to move back to Northern Ireland after the Second World War. Unfortunately, he couldn't go back to Poland because of the affairs at that time. And while based in Northern Ireland, he met a girl. So he decided he will move back to Northern Ireland and try his luck with her. They got married. Paul had a very difficult life in Northern Ireland because some of the local people were asking him to go back home because he wasn't needed. He was taking jobs from local boys coming back from the front. So Paul had to migrate to Liverpool and work in the mines for many years because he couldn't find a job in Northern Ireland. When he eventually found a job in Northern Ireland, provided by an American businessman who opened a factory in Bangor, very often, and he was traveling by bike, very often his bike tires were being slashed. He decided to actually change his name to Paul Henderson. His English was pretty good, and he eventually was able to integrate with local community. Although they tried to move from Northern Ireland at least twice. When everything was set up for him and his family to move to Canada, he couldn't go because his wife got pregnant. After a few years later, they decided to move again from Northern Ireland to another country, and you know what happened? His wife got pregnant again. It turns out that she didn't want to go and she wanted to stay close to her mom. Paul passed away yes, I never had a chance to meet him, but I have a really good relationship with his family. That's him. He wasn't a pilot. He was actually eventually he became a rear gunner, flying with Polish bomber squadron. Very interesting story. In 1939, he actually ended up in Gulag, and he spent 2 years in a Russian concentration camp, being released in 1941. The second, Denkowski, Stanisław, who also served with 315 in Bali Halberd. Very similar story. He met a girl, he moved back to Northern Ireland, he got married. Denkowski was a mechanic, that's him, sitting on the wing of a Spitfire. That's him in 315 uniform. You can see the 315 badge on his chest and some of his documents that were being kindly provided by his family. And Denkowski, he wanted to stay with the RAF, but unfortunately his English wasn't good enough, and RAF didn't, they had plenty of their own mechanics. Interesting fact is that after World War II, RAF employed only 500 Polish pilots, the creme de la creme from the Polish Air Force that couldn't stay, they couldn't go back to Poland. And Denkowski also stayed around Arcs Peninsula, living in Ballywalter until his time, and I also have a very good connection with his family today. The third one, possibly the most interesting one when it comes to his service, Rogalski. You can find his grave in Armagh on a Presbyterian cemetery on a Black Road. He was actually serving with 30301 Polish Bomber Squadron, receiving Virtuti Militari medal, which was the equivalent of the Polish VC. He was one of the first airmen who actually took part in raids over Germany in 1940. He was wounded. After he was actually employed by the RAF, and he ended up his serving as a squadron leader. After he retired, his wife, who was from Northern Ireland, encouraged him to move to live in Northern Ireland. This was the retirement plan. So they ended up living in Armagh, and his family is still living in Moira. We also have a contact with them today. These are the graves of, there are 15 World War II military graves related to Polish Air Force in Northern Ireland. This is Bali-Kramberg in County Down. You have Grondowski, Kołek, and Tuczynski. So two of them died on the 11th of September 1943. This one died in Rashakin. What is happening? You see air cadets sprinkling a soil over the graves. So to mark Polish independence, the centenary of the Polish independence 2018, we decided to bring a handful of Polish soil to Northern Ireland. And we actually sprinkled that soil over all the graves, Polish graves in Northern Ireland that we know. That was a very symbolic gesture. This was the way to kind of reunite Polish pilots with Poland in 2018. You have also 3 graves at Mobila Cemetery. This is Heller, this is Fiegel, and there was another one I forgot, pardon me. And the last thing that I would like to tell you in terms of Polish connection and Polish Air Force connection to Northern Ireland is the Belfast Telegraph Spitfire Fund. I don't know if you heard of that. In 1940, when World War II eventually reached out to the United Kingdom, the Belfast Telegraph decided to start a Spitfire fund, asking people of Northern Ireland to donate money so they can buy a Spitfire. The fund was so successful that they were able to purchase several Spitfires, and they all were being named after different locations in Northern Ireland. So we had Spitfire Aldergrove, Antrim, Spitfire Armagh Belfast, and Ballymena. And some of them were being used by the Polish squadrons. Some were being used by the Polish pilots flying with the RAF squadrons. So there is a very strong connotation through the Belfast Telegraph Spitfire Fund and the Polish pilots. On some, unfortunately, Polish pilots lost their lives, like Spitfire Ballymena, who wasn't very lucky for Czachomski from 315 Squadron, who lost his life on the 24th of July, 1941. Mid-Ulster, Spitfire City of Derry, Spitfire Enniskillen, Spitfire Caron, and another kind of mystery story of Spitfire Portadown. Some claim that Spitfire Portadown was being used by 315 Squadron, and they changed its name from Spitfire Portadown to Spitfire Krysia. Why Krysia? Because this was the name of the girlfriend, of the pilot's girlfriend in Poland. And he decided it's going to be much better for him to fly Krysia than Portadown, because he would look after Krysia much better than Portadown. And I'm mentioning Portadown the second time today. I just would like to clarify, I have nothing against Portadown and people from Portadown. I was living there and I really admire that part of Northern Ireland. The last time when the Polish pilots were being seen in Northern Ireland was on the 17th of July 1945. This was the time when the royal family was actually visiting Northern Ireland on their victory tour. This was also the first time when the royal family was being flown in the air. En route to Belfast, they were being escorted by two Polish squadrons, 306 and 315. So that was the last time when the Polish Air Force was being seen over Northern Ireland in Second World War, or that was actually almost after the Second World War. Until last year. Last year, we decided to bring a Spitfire in Polish 303 markings. That was actually based for 6 days in Newtonards and had a fly past over several locations across Northern Ireland. So we decided it would be really nice to make this event possible. We were hoping to bring it this year. Unfortunately, it was unsuccessful, so we're aiming to do it again next year. And this is actually a very nice image of the Spitfire and Scrabble Tower in Newtonards. The end of the Second World War, as you can see, very unfortunate situation for Poland. We were fighting for Polish independence, mainly from the United Kingdom, but we ended up as a part of the communist bloc, right? Based on the peace process, Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt agreed that Europe going to be divided between west part of Poland that would actually be the west part of Europe that would be free and independent, and east part of Poland that meant to be independent, because that's what Stalin promised. But actually, we, Poland and other countries, we ended up as a part of the Soviet bloc, which was another very difficult part of the Polish history. And to be honest, some of the Polish people are very unhappy with this, because they claim that Poles did a lot to fight for the British independence, especially during the Battle of Britain. Also, Polish army were supporting allies in the Second World War, in different theaters of war, and we ended up without independence, right? This is partially true. As a Polish person, I would actually follow this narrative, but as a person with common sense, I believe there was no country in Europe or in the world that would try to fight Russians after in 1945 to fight for independence of Poland and other Central or Eastern European countries. We have to remember that Russians were already in Eastern Berlin, right? The UK was exhausted. US was exhausted. So there was no one who could actually start the fight. And that's why, unfortunately, we had to deal with 50 years of communism, which was a Monty Python-like style of living. I don't want to mention that now because this is another story, but it was very complicated. Coming back to Polish borders, Poland post-World War I, Poland post-World War II. So based on the Yalta Agreement, Russia or Soviet Union demanded to keep the territory that they actually, the annexation of 1939. So Polish border shifted 200 miles west. Yes, we got a bigger access to the Baltic Sea, but we lost plenty of territory on the west, including Polish people. And this was very difficult because some of the Polish people that were living here, they became minority in foreign countries overnight. Also, it was very challenging for some of the Polish soldiers that were based in England, for example, because some of them were coming from this part of Poland and they were lost. They couldn't actually go back to their homes. Some of the people from here were being moved to Wrocław or Szczecin. So there was actually also a mass migration. So the whole situation in Poland were actually flipped upside down because of the peace process. And the most important fact, the soldiers that were fighting with allies in the United Kingdom, in the West, they were not welcomed in Poland by the Polish communist government. Some of them were kind of, they wanted to keep, put the politics on the side. They just wanted to go back to Poland and see if their families and friends are still alive. Unfortunately, some of them were being thrown to the prison, and some of them actually were being executed by the Polish government that was led by the Soviets. You have to remember, in 1945, there was 100,000 Polish soldiers based in the United Kingdom. If they all decide to come to Poland, they would start an uprising against the Soviets to fight for the Polish independence. Yeah, that would be kind of, this process would potentially took place. So the Soviets decided to send them a strong message: you're not welcome, by killing some of them, which is a very tragic part of the history. While in the United Kingdom, they had no pension, they had no support coming from the states, and they had no support coming from the Polish government in exile because they clearly had no money. There were actually events of Polish generals, like General Maciek, who was actually a very successful Polish general, working as a bartender in a pub in Edinburgh. When he was actually, and Polish soldiers were drinking there quite often. So where he was pouring them, a pint of ale or a drum of whiskey, they were saluting him. And local people were asking why these people are saluting to the bartender, right? Because they didn't know he was a high-rank Polish general. There is a case of Polish officers in their 40s cleaning silver in the Ritz Hotel in London, because this was the only way they could actually earn money to survive. Majority of Polish soldiers decided to move to Canada, to US, to Australia, or to Argentina to search for a better life. Even today, when you kind of talk to the families of the soldiers who survived the Second World War in the West, families are saying that they don't know much about their stories because they wanted to keep it very secret. To keep the families safe, especially the families that left in Poland, because any connotations with soldiers that were fighting in the West could cause you prison or maybe a life sentence. And this is the last slide for today. My favorite image of the Polish Air Force taken in the Second World War. This is the 303 Squadron coming back from one of the raids during the Battle of Britain with the Hurricane in the background. Why I like this image? Because this image is everything I would like to tell you about the Polish pilots. Based on the tragic end of the Second World War for Poland and the Polish soldiers in the United Kingdom, and you also have to know that they were not even invited to take part in the victory parade in 1946 in London, because literally Stalin decided the government in Poland is responsible, the army based in Poland is the army based in Poland, and you don't invite the Polish staffer in the United Kingdom, right? So they were even, badly treated by the government at that time. If I would actually have to have a chat with these guys, I'm pretty sure that they would tell me, listen, if you actually try to tell the story of the Polish armed forces in the Second World War, don't try to make people guilty for how we ended up. Try to make people respect and remember us for what we did and for our actions. And I believe, like, when I see them, I see actually an ordinary man who did extraordinary thing when the time is right. And I think that's how I would like you to remember the Polish pilots in the Second World War and the story about the Polish Air Force in the West. Thank you very much. I hope that was interesting. If you would like to learn more about the Polish pilots in Northern Ireland, you can visit Polish Heritage Trail, where you can get access to the map. You can get in touch with me at maciekforyourfreedomandhours.com or visit our profiles on Facebook and Twitter as well. Thank you very much.